Well, hello there, folks. Jack here with the first Miyagi mornings of the week. I think this is 66. I don't remember anymore. Anyway, today's question, as usual, comes from MeWe, and it's a pretty interesting one. Person asked about determining the location to place a new garden. And they said that it was on the eastern side of a house, and it got shade in the morning. And so I'm really not sure. There's a lot of it depends in there. Because eastern shade, or being on the east side of a building, usually you have shade in the afternoon, which is ideal. So maybe I'm reading that wrong. Maybe what they're saying is they have eastern shade and western sun. I'm not sure. But I'll try to answer it more for everybody than for just the one individual anyway. So when it comes to setting up a garden location, I believe in teaching things in a way that they'll be remembered, and generally people remember acronyms pretty well. So I describe it as the POW method, P-O-W-W. Proximity, orientation, wind, and water. Those are your four primary things to think about. And you might find that the others, or the simple availability of land, or other circumstances outside of that method, overweigh any one of them individually. So let's start off with exactly what happened here with the garden that's behind me, proximity. Ideally, your garden will be close enough to your house that either looking out the front door or the back door, just like John Fogerty, looking out your back door, you will see your garden from your back door or your front door. And if you need to go out and grab some parsley or something, and it's kind of a cold, rainy winter's day, and you're making stew, and you want to grab some herbs that are still in season, you can just put your slippers on, run out of the fuzzy slipper. Test is what Bill Mollison said. He said if you can't go out in your fuzzy slippers and come back with them not all soaking wet, you won't go get it. So yeah, that would be great, but you also have to temper that against reality. But we want it somewhat close to where we live. Okay, orientation is where we're going to look at how it's oriented to solar exposure and solar radiance. So what's ideal in one climate is not ideal in the other. In Pennsylvania, when I ran my grandfather's garden for him as a kid, we had that garden set down toward the bottom of the yard. You pull the car in, there's a little driveway, you get a front yard, and then a further front yard. And when we were in the further front yard, I guess, it was bottom land. There was a big hill off to one side that didn't really ever shade the garden. And that meant it was kind of a catchment area for water, which we'll get to in a second. It was great, and it had sunshine from about the time the sun rose until in the summer, it would get 13, 14 hours of sun. And that was fantastic. And everything was happy. Everything grew like crazy because of how far north latitude we were. Now, move down here to Texas. You do that to a garden down here, and your garden will hate you, and it will die in the middle of summer. It will literally just burn up and die. So you have to determine how much sun you really want based on your climate type and how much you can get. General rule, you want at least 6 to 8 hours of full sun during the peak of your solar timeline, right? So you're not going to get 8 hours of full sun at a time when you only get about 7 hours of sun, period. So don't get to an extreme with that. But we want to orient the garden to we maximize solar exposure to our biome. Now down here in the south, the best place for a garden is right where this one is. I know you can't see it from here because I had to tuck in this little bit of shade to be able to do this video, but right over there's a building, and there's 2 huge oak trees. And my son starts out actually kind of almost behind the camera in the peak of summer, moves around behind me, and then sets way over in the west. Our sun actually, because of where we're at, doesn't just go over, it goes from, kind of actually almost in your northeast and sets in your northwest. Maybe, west by northwest and east by northeast type of situation. So we get that huge arc. Once we get to about 5 o'clock in the evening, half of this garden behind me is shaded, and by 7 o'clock the whole thing is. Now if you're from a northern climate, you might think, well, that's no big deal. Down here, whatever the temperature is in the middle of summer at 6 o'clock in the evening, it's gonna be hotter at 9 o'clock at night. It keeps going up. And the western sun is absolutely fundamentally brutal on your crops in our summer dearth, that kind of time where we actually get knocked back for like a month and a half, about July 1st through mid-August, sometimes all the way to around the 1st of September. Things just don't really do really well. And so we're kind of growing as much as we can by then. We're keeping everything alive during that period, getting a little bit of production, and we go into a second big explosion of production. Pennsylvania, it went all the way through. So you deal with the orientation based on where you're at, okay? And then we have wind. Right now, wind is hitting me right here in the side of my head. The wind is coming from the west. The time of the seasons around here where we get the most brutal wind at the worst time for our plants is right when we're setting them out, right about now. It's February, March, the beginning of April, and it primarily comes from the west. So again, by setting on the eastern side of this building, this whole building, my aviary, my greenhouse, the trees, the food forest, everything is blocking wind in this direction. This is great for two reasons. Number one, wind causes evaporation. It reduces your water, all right, which we get to next. But the other thing is, you put a little plant out there, that poor little plant's just come out of a nursery, and you stick it out there, and then all of a sudden, it just tears the shit out of it. It rips leaves off, and it beats the crap out of it. When I was in Arlington, my place is about an hour south of here, there was no real good way to block wind, and I actually would, during this time of year, would set up plywood temporary barriers to block wind. That works, and it was the only way to get my plants through this beat up time of the year when those new baby plants were going out there. Here I have natural structures to do that, but we need to look at wind for its effect on the plants and for its effect on evaporation. So obviously mulching and things like that, all those things can help keep more water in the soil, but wind wicks away water. And it's something people don't generally look at, is blocking wind for the purpose of, again, protecting the plants themselves until they look out and see their little plants they just spent $3 a piece at Home Depot for, looking like a miniature tree in a hurricane down off South Florida. And then again, the evaporation is a big one everybody overlooks. And then water. We need to look at water from a variety of standpoints. We want to know, number one, what is the effective overland flow of water in an area? If we have a steep hill, we don't want to put our beds up and down the hill. We want to put them across the hill on contour. In general, contour is a great idea. When you have raised beds like I do, these big tall ones keep the ducks out of them, it really doesn't matter from that standpoint. But we want to make sure that we're considering all natural water and our ability to irrigate. So we can pretty much take our ability to irrigate anywhere we want to and have the money and the budget to do so. As long as we can plumb into some existing water pressure, we can bring it out there. But we also need to look at what are we going to irrigate with. If you're fortunate like me and you're on a well, it's great water to irrigate with. If you're fortunate like me, you have a well plus rain catch. Rainwater is your best irrigation water. Even if you are irrigating in a classic sense, rain catch is better than well, and well is better than city. That said, if you have to water your garden with city water, go ahead and do it, but think about water in the equation. And so when you put those together, you come up with a total picture of how you pick where your garden's gonna go. And then you have to sanity check against what's available and where your ideal spots are and where your doable spots are. So for instance here, this garden that I'm standing in front of right now fails the proximity test of the fuzzy slippers. It's not a huge walk, but there's a building, there's a lot of stuff in the way I just described that blocks the wind, and my house is kind of way back over there. It's a 1 minute walk and you're here. It's no big deal, right? So we got that going on, but why? So if I come directly out of my back porch and I go where your typical classic zone 1 in permaculture would be, I have a leach field, okay? And that leach field is at an age where not only, I'm not worried about contaminating the food. That's something people overthink, but it's probably gonna need to be dug up in the next few years, okay? It's also the place that my grandson plays. It's his play area. It's where we have our barter blanket. There's other things that go on in that space, and since I will never have trees or anything in that space, it's become kind of like the athletic space, the gathering space, etc. So I don't want a garden there. My other option, and if I was doing a market garden or something like that, it was not an educational facility, it's where I would have a garden, is right out my front door. There's a great spot out there, good, at least 1/4 acre, relatively flat, great exposure. Some things could be done to add some shade. Plant some trees along the western corridor to add that western shade. It's a great spot. Why don't I do it? Well, because I'm an educational facility and I have events where there's 60, 70 people here and I have to have a place people can park. So I don't want to garden there. Those are actually in some ways better places, but we've done some things over here that make this place ideal. One is the wind blocking and the solar aspect, and those things outweighed everything. The other is that great big, almost 5,000 gallons of water sitting there right in the center of the gardens. And what that's doing is it's creating its own microclimate. It's also attracting the hell out of pollinators. You can do whatever you want with, flowers and pollen and nectar and all that, and you should. But boy, I'll tell you what, around here in the middle of summer, when you've got something like that with all those water plants floating on top of it, where a bee or a wasp can come in and land and safely drink water, that place is a buzz in a real way. So water is not just water for the plants, but what can a water feature do for the garden? So then we get a moderating microclimate, we get predator attraction. You have to balance all of this out. And you have to think about the long-term plan. So maybe this is a really great spot you have right now for a garden. It's got everything going for it and it's doable. But if your long-term plan includes other design elements, that may alter the final location of the garden. The good news is if you're doing something like raised beds and you decide you want to move your garden, and you have something as simple as a lawn tractor, a shovel, and a little trailer cart like I do, you can fairly easily, even all the work you've put into building soil and all, unbolt some boards, pick them up, haul them over, bolt them back together, bring the dirt over and dump it in and start over if you really want to. So it's never going to be, in a conventional garden scenario, truly a type 1 error. It's not like putting a pond or a dam in where, man, I've done that now and I'm stuck with it. And I think that's the final thing I want to leave you with today. If you've put a garden in a spot and it's really not working out, and over the time you've learned your property through observation, you've learned through videos like this that, hey, there's really a better place, don't think you have to live with something as simple as a garden. You can move it somewhere else. And I would say you might want to start thinking a little bit in the mindset of Joel Salatin with fences when it comes to gardens with permanent structures. And what I mean by that is when you invest in something like what's behind me here, this is a fairly permanent structure. Or if you're going to go in and do like keyhole gardens with dry stack stone or mortared stone really, or something like that, where it's really a permanent structure. You might want to kind of temporarily use that place until after a year or so, then we might build it up. So I had a little garden here and I trialed this area and it worked out. And it was real easy decision to just tear it up and build what you see now. So I gave it like, does this area work the way that I think that it does? I put up a quick little temporary fence, threw standard box garden on the ground, just a few raised beds, threw some irrigation on it and said, yes, this spot does what I think it does. And then I was willing to invest in this. That comes from Joel Salatin this way. What he says about fencing, put up a temporary fence, stick some rebar on the ground, put some electric wire on it, put a charger on it, whatever, put up a temporary fence. If 2 years after you put that temporary fence up, it's still in the same place and you haven't felt the need to move it, go ahead and put your full-time permanent fence in. Just think that way. Remember, POW, proximity, orientation, wind, water. Take care, guys.